I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, President. To be frank, when we heard about this meeting on Ukraine being requested by our Western colleagues, there was a fleeting thought in our minds. We thought that the reason for this was the fact that at the start of July, we received a poignant letter from a group of Ukrainian political prisoners addressed to the Security Council President. Let me remind you that it was signed by well-known politicians, human rights defenders, civil servants, and MPs who are today prisoners of the Zelensky regime. For instance, Elena Berezhnaya, Vyacheslav Boguslayev, Vitaly Godina, Artem Dmitruk, Alexander Dubinsky, Oleg Kulinich, Miroslav Oleshko, Alexander Oleynikov, Yuri Rabucha. You all had an opportunity to read that letter and to see for yourself that the number of political prisoners in Ukraine runs into the thousands. Constitutional norms and laws are not being implemented. People are being put behind bars for, and here I quote, calling for peace and the holding of elections, for opposing the war between Slav peoples, for their political and religious convictions, for criticizing the forced mobilization, and for their active civil stance, end of quote. Ukrainian political prisoners are calling on the Security Council to achieve a repeal, and here I quote again, of all illegal sanctions imposed since the start of the war on Ukrainian citizens, for instance, unconstitutional and repressive means of political persecution, end of quote. So it's not just a letter, it's a cri de coeur. Now, back then, we didn't draw the Council's attention to this document to avoid giving our foes a pretext to try and portray all of this as Russian propaganda, as they always do in such cases. Think no further than the fact that in January 2024, Gonzalo Lira, an American citizen, was tormented to death in a security service of Ukraine cell, whose HR revelations were written off as Russian propaganda by the Kyiv regime. Starting in 2014, any criticism of the Ukrainian government, according to what they say is Russian propaganda, this unsophisticated logic persists to this day. The forced mobilization, which the human rights defenders mentioned in their letter, is also, according to the Kyiv posse, a concoction of the Kremlin. Yet all Ukrainians know that Zelensky's draft officers, the Territorial Centers for Recruitment, or TCRs, well, they're literally abducting people in broad daylight on the streets, in malls, pharmacies, and sports clubs. In doing so, they're using the harshest, at times inhumane methods. Hundreds, if not thousands, of cases have been reported of draftees being killed or maimed. All Ukrainians are talking about this, but the authorities deny it. There's a plethora of videos on social media where men are being nabbed in the streets. They're being ripped from their families, badly beaten, pushed into buses, frequently leaving their small children alone in the street. And Ukrainian civil servants are calling this, cynically calling this, scenes staged by the Moscow film studio. If we believe the Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainians are queuing up to go to the front. Can you imagine what it's like for ordinary Ukrainians to listen to such vile lies? However, recently, this system of collective lying and covering up for each other faltered. Staff at one such draft center in Transcarpathia, during one of their raids, seriously injured a 45-year-old man, József Shibentev, an ethnic Hungarian who's a citizen of both Ukraine and Hungary. As a result, he ended up in hospital and died after a few weeks. And this despite the fact that Mr. Sebastian was drafted but then deemed unfit for duty for health reasons. There are hundreds of such cases in Ukraine. They are the norm for the so-called Zelensky concentration camp. That's what Ukrainians are calling their own country. Yet, for our Western colleagues, this topic is taboo. This legal free-for-all is something all European and US human rights defenders aren't talking about. They've been ordered to never speak ill of Ukraine. And this poor soul, Mr. Sebastian, no one would have found out about his fate. But, unfortunately for Zelensky and his sponsors, he turned out to be a Hungarian. Thus, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary protested decisively against the killing of their citizen and demanded official explanations. In response, the Ukrainians said that supposedly the draftee had attempted to flee and then died in hospital of natural causes. Of course, the Ukrainian side, just like in many other cases, despite the obvious facts, refused to bear any responsibility for the man's demise. These lies, of course, did not satisfy Budapest, and the scandal rages on. President, It's a good thing we have Hungary, which takes a principled stance. Hungary does not want to, in contrast to the overwhelming majority of other EU countries, does not want to turn a